Exposed, veteran's incredible medals mocked, then an inspiring general revealed the hidden truth. Jake McAllister stood in his auto shop, the clattering of tools a constant reminder that he was still here, still fighting, though not on the battlefield, not against an enemy, but in a community that seemed to have forgotten his service. He could feel the weight of the medals hanging in their frames at home, their gleaming surfaces mocking the laughter from behind the high school's paper-thin walls, where the youth caricatured him as a relic of an unpopular war. A veteran in worn-out overalls, Jake was the epitome of irony, a man who bled for the country now scorned by its own. Each snicker cut deeper than any shrapnel. How had he slipped from valor to a punchline? The townsfolk whispered as if they had the answers, but their ignorance wore him thin. Discussions of politics left scars across their faces, and Jake felt it: the dismissive looks, the scornful jests, the sharp dismissals of his medals as mere glimmering trinkets. Every day in the shop, under the hood of an aging Chevrolet, Jake swirled around the vicious reality that he couldn't escape. They believed he hadn't sacrificed anything. And worse, he believed it too, every time they piled more ridicule atop his back. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. But that wasn't all. News of General Sarah Mitchell's arrival fluttered through town like a winter breeze, a mix of trepidation and reluctant hope. Jake's palms felt clammy as he recalled the anticipation he once felt meeting a commander, a piece of a different world. Would she listen? Would she care? So many emotions collided in his chest as the thought of a town hall meeting loomed. A chance to speak, to reveal the truth encased in the shine of his awards. Yet, each possibility felt like a minefield, filled with explosive potential for utter humiliation. As he ducked under the raised hood of a sedan, his mind raced with images of lost comrades, brave souls whose youthful dreams were ripped apart on foreign soil. In those moments of silence, shadows danced in his memories, moments he couldn't unsee, families he couldn't unfeel. Would they even hear him? The anxiety curled in his stomach like a festering wound. He could picture their eyes rolling, scrutinizing his worn hands as he bared his soul, an old veteran fighting for acknowledgement. A storm raged within him, desperation clawing at the edges of his resolve. What if he did attend? What if he poured out the anguish he's bottled for decades? And all he received was mockery, a voice in a sea of laughter? The thought gnawed at him until it was nearly unbearable. Painful memories unwound at the periphery of his consciousness, and then, as if fate had intervened, he stumbled upon an old box while cleaning the attic. Dust swirled around him as he pried it open, revealing letters from a father he barely knew, an unsung hero, yet amid the battles of life, had fought against injustices both in and out of the uniform. Could this family legacy provide the catalyst he needed to redefine his own narrative? The weight of his father's forgotten valor intertwined with his own haunted him now, presenting a glimmer of hope in a world of darkness. Jake faced the gut-wrenching choice: would he step forward, risking everything, or lose himself in silence? Caught between a past draped in honor and a present that suffocated, he looked toward the framed medals now heavy upon his chest, wrestling with the ultimate truth, in the battle to reclaim his dignity, which would be the greater offense: to remain quiet or to unearth a painful family history, risking it all? The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across Jake's workshop as he tightened the last screw on the engine he'd been repairing all afternoon. The car was a sanctuary of sorts, a place where he could momentarily block out the world that regarded him with derision, but even here, the weight of indecision pulled heavily on his shoulders. Would the upcoming town hall meeting be his reckoning or his undoing? He paused, wiping the sweat from his brow, thoughts swirling with doubt. He could still picture the letters spilling out of the box, words filled with anguish and pride, detailing his father's struggles, his silent battles against an ungrateful society. Would sharing those letters, the essence of his father's spirit, be what he needed to regain his own? He gripped the edges of the workbench, forcing himself to breathe deeply. Perhaps it was time to break the cycle of shame that clung to him like an old oil stain. That evening, the quiet of his house felt suffocating. In the dark, Jake dug deeper into the box he'd uncovered. Each letter felt like a lifeline, a roadmap of his father's life woven together with threads of courage and sacrifice. He discovered stories of protests against foreign wars, of camaraderie and heartache. His father had once stood his ground against skepticism, a quality Jake admired and envied in equal measure. "I can't let fear dictate my actions anymore," he muttered to himself, staring at the gold medals that hung on the wall like distant stars. They belonged to him, but they felt borrowed. In his father's voice, he found not just a legacy but a clarion call to action. The time to confront the past was fast approaching, and with it, an opportunity to reshape how he saw his story and, perhaps, how others would too. By the time dawn broke and painted his yard in shades of gray, Jake had made a decision: he would attend the meeting. Not merely to defend himself but to reflect on what service truly meant, both on and off the field. He would share both his own experiences and his father's forgotten tales of valor. It was a gamble, one that might just shatter the prison of doubt he had lived in for years. As he readied his thoughts, memories from the war began to surface again, unbidden and urgent. The weight of his lost comrades pressed down, urging him to speak for them as well, to ensure their sacrifices didn't vanish beneath the laughter of the ignorant. What if confrontation could lead to healing, not just for him but for the community that had dismissed his life as trivial? With an emerging clarity, Jake began to draft his speech, pouring his soul into every word. This was about reclaiming his identity, opening up the wounds of his past, and allowing others to see the human experience behind the medals. He was no longer simply a veteran in overalls, he would become a voice of both personal and familial history, vivid and unashamed. As he drove to the town hall later that day, the engine of the car roared to life under his hand, reflecting the awakening resolve within him. The laughter that lingered behind him felt distant now. The meeting room loomed ahead, a stage upon which he would finally risk everything. But would they listen? Would they reject him outright or connect in ways he never anticipated? The uncertainty pricked at him like 1,000 needles, yet within that painful anticipation lay a sense of empowerment he had long forsaken. The moment had arrived. Jake inhaled deeply, feeling the sharp fragrance of gasoline and metal while visions of his father's courage flickered in his mind. This time, he would not let his voice be silenced. As he stepped towards the entrance, he understood one thing clearly: he was here to confront the greatest adversary of all, himself. With that realization, he pushed the door open, nerves firing in all directions, ready to change the narrative of his life, but unaware of the unexpected backlash awaiting him inside. As Jake stepped inside the town hall, the atmosphere felt charged with tension, thick as the metal he breathed in the garage hours before. A small crowd had gathered, murmuring amongst themselves, the click of heels on hardwood echoing like distant gunfire. Uncertainty wrestled within him. Those who belittled his service were in attendance, their disdain palpable in the air. Yet, his father's voice fluttered in the recesses of his mind, reminding him that courage sometimes meant standing alone. He took a seat at the long wooden table designated for speakers, hands trembling slightly as he clutched his notes. The dim lighting reflected the uncertainty in his heart. Each tick of the clock seemed to echo his growing apprehension. Would they see the man his father once was, or merely the sum of their laughter? His pulse quickened as he waited for his turn. The other speakers were discussing community grievances, mundane complaints that felt trivial compared to the weight of his own. Yet, deep down, he sensed that this was what he had to face: the dismissive attitudes, the scoffing at his medals that hung as relics of a past deemed inconsequential. When his name was finally called, the room's murmurs faded. Jake stood, facing a sea of questioning glances. For a moment, he faltered, the carefully composed words slipping from his mind like water through a sieve. But then, the letters flashed before him, his father's pen strokes lighting a fire within. He took a deep breath and began. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. I'm not here to showcase medals or talk about glory. I'm here to share a message that my father taught me, one that has been buried under years of shame and misunderstanding. His voice, surprisingly steady, surprised himself. As he continued, his words grew in conviction. He recounted his father's life, the protests, the battles fought not just on foreign soil but within their small town. When he described a moment etched in his mind, his father standing up to pelted insults during a rally, eyes aflame with indignation, it was as if a dam broke. The silence deepened, the laughter that had previously dominated the room shifted into contemplation. Memories became shared experiences. He quoted the letters, not just to evoke pity but to provoke connection. I stand before you as a veteran, yes, but also as a son who only recently began understanding the weight of what service truly means. It's not about being recognized by others, but claiming your own narrative, owning your story in spite of those who mock it. The words flowed from him like an essential truth, raw and unfiltered. But then came a voice, a man seated near the front, face hard and dismissive. What's your point? Nobody cares about your sob story. We want actionable solutions, not this pathetic excuse for a speech. The words sliced through the air like a knife, and Jake felt the crowd shift back, uncertain. His vision narrowed, but the growing sparks of outrage within him overshadowed any self-doubt. Your laughter may echo in my ears, he replied, voice rising, but my father's sacrifices reverberate in my soul. The room stirred, tension curling thick in the air. His heart hammered as he realized he was no longer speaking just to a crowd but facing the very essence of their skepticism. Jake sensed a shift. Some onlookers no longer looked bored or indifferent. There were furrowed brows and hardened faces softening, starting to understand that every story of war was not merely a narrative of loss but one of courage, resilience, and honesty. Just as he began to feel the ground shifting beneath him, a familiar figure emerged from the crowd, a respected general known for his own storied past, stepping forward. The general's stern countenance turned into a softened expression, eyes locking onto Jake's. Let me add something, he said firmly. Your father's story is a testament to a truth often overlooked, and your voice today is essential. You've stirred the truth beneath our complacency. The sudden support left Jake reeling, but liberation pulsed through him. He had begun to shift minds, perhaps hearts as well, while pulling forth a hidden truth none had anticipated. As the general spoke, Jake's mind raced with possibilities. Would the tides really shift from skepticism to understanding? Would this moment become a turning point, reshaping how the town viewed his story? Or could one voice still drown in a sea of doubt? The ramifications of this single moment washed over him, leaving Jake breathless not just from fear but with a clear realization that he was standing on the shores of change. What other truths lay dormant, waiting to be unearthed? And as the general took the floor, Jake pondered the most pressing question: had he only just begun to discover the latent strength within him, or was he on the brink of confronting even deeper fears? As the general spoke about courage and truth, Jake felt a surge of energy pulse through the room. The previously indifferent faces began to shift. If the general believed Jake's story was worth sharing, perhaps it truly could ignite a change in perception. But as he stood there, chest tight with a mix of gratitude and doubt, the enormity of what had occurred overwhelmed him. In the midst of applause echoing around him, Jake absorbed the murmurs of support spiraling throughout the hall, but his inner voice kept whispering self-doubt. What if this moment was fleeting? What if once the general sat back down, the world returned to its usual scorn? He knew he had to act, to grasp this ascendant feeling and build on it. As the meeting dissolved into chaos of conversations, Jake moved away from the table, seeking solitude in the corners of the hall. He needed a moment to stabilize himself, to redirect the fierceness bubbling inside. He stepped toward a window, his hands pressing against the cool glass. Outside, the afternoon sun kept casting shadows longer as daylight faded. He observed people leaving, some were in deep conversation, others wore glazed expressions reflecting weariness. A familiar apprehension grazed his thoughts again. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking through his reverie. A text from his sister. "Jake, that was powerful. You made a difference." The words felt like a warm embrace, yet the validation also made him feel exposed. What now? Did this mean he could transform the narrative that he had been imprisoned by for so long? Renewed determination flickered as he recalled his father's strength. It was in that recollection that a strategy formed. He needed to turn this support into an opportunity for further dialogue. Not just any dialogue, but structured conversations, forums where other veterans could share their experiences, their truths, unfiltered by ridicule. Jake started pacing, tapping out ideas in his mind while mentally preparing to advocate for this vision. The fear of rejection flickered through him, but he refused to let it take root. "This could empower others," he murmured under his breath. "We can create a space where we aren't just shouting our stories into empty air." But his thoughts couldn't subdue the lurking doubt. The memories of mockery danced at the edges of his mind, laughter ringing like a haunting refrain. What if no one showed up? What if some of those who once belittled him came to ridicule instead? The very thought made his stomach churn. He took a breath, pushing down the toxicity of those doubts. Perhaps, he mused, this was also part of the journey, a lesson in vulnerability. He couldn't transform the narrative for others until he learned to embrace his own story fully, flaws and all. His confidence had been ignited, but the kindling still needed careful nurturing. With a clearer mind, Jake stepped away from the window, resolute. An idea blossomed, a community meeting that invites engagement, not judgment. He envisioned a stage where service is honored, stories are shared, and empathy nurtured. It could be life-changing not just for him, but for countless others. As he returned to the main hall, the energy buzzing with renewed interactions, he spotted the general approaching. With a firm handshake and steady eye contact, Jake articulated his thoughts. "I want to take this further. I want to host meeting spaces for all of us to share our truths. Can you help?" The general's warm smile expanded into something more convincing, a nod of affirmation that surged confidence through Jake once again. However, as they exchanged ideas, a flicker of annoyance swept across the general's face as they gestured toward a contingent at the back, those who scoffed earlier. "What are we up against?" the general asked, a seriousness shadowing his demeanor. Jake's resolve deepened. "I'm ready to confront them. Together, we'll shed light on what they refuse to understand." Yet, as he stood before the general, the very uncertainty Jake once wrestled with began creeping back. Would confronting these detractors yield the understanding he envisioned, or would he end up reopening old wounds? The confrontation loomed ahead, and Jake could feel the weight of impending choices pressing down. He recognized this was no longer just about personal courage but an opportunity to reshape how they all viewed those who served. What steps would he take to engage in this confrontation? And would he walk away victorious, or would he learn the hard way what it truly means to face those who resist change? Jake's mind raced as he navigated through the hall. He felt the clipped sounds of his shoes on the polished floor almost echo the uncertainty in his heart. A confrontation with those who mocked him suddenly felt tangible and daunting. Could he truly shift perceptions, redirect the disdain he had felt for so long? The task now seemed Herculean. As he approached the small group assembled at the rear, their laughter rang sharp against the backdrop of newfound optimism. Faces twisted in muted sneers, eyes darting around as if expecting Jake to falter. They were the very embodiment of doubt, the naysayers he had envisioned battling against. Yet, he knew that an equal measure of neediness flickered within them, the same need that had once consumed him, an urge to be understood. "I can do this," he whispered softly to himself, as if the mantra might imbue him with the strength he craved. Raising his chin slightly, he approached them. The small talk slowed, conversations muted into whispers that felt laced with mock intrigue. The general's presence lingered just beyond his shoulder, supportive but distant. It was time for Jake to take center stage. "Excuse me," he began, his voice gaining steady ground. The derision in their eyes felt like knives, but he pushed through. "I'm here to talk, not to fight. I want to share something important." They exchanged dubious glances. Jake plunged ahead, buoyed by the memories of his shared resolve with the general. "You know, you might think you understand what veterans go through, but I want to offer a clearer picture. We're not all just numbers and decorations. We've got stories, authentic experiences that shape who we are." One of the scoffers, a tall man with a wide grin, crossed his arms. "And what do you think your story will change? This isn't a therapy session." Jake's pulse quickened. The dismissiveness felt like being plunged into cold water. He could either freeze or push forward, igniting a stronger resolve. "It could change the way you see someone like me. It could help you realize we're human just like you." With each word, Jake felt a shift, the grip of panic loosened slightly. The group began to lean in, feigning a sense of interest. The tall man's grin faded just a fraction, but enough for Jake to notice. Tension knotted in the pit of Jake's stomach. What if they overwhelmed him with more mocking? What if he burst through this door and it slammed shut in his face? He felt the overwhelming need to prove that he didn't just have a voice, he had a reason to be heard. "Let's get real," he pressed. "You think this is easy for me? Standing here, bearing my soul? Trust me, I've faced battles you'll never understand. But I'm willing to speak if you're willing to listen. What do you think holds you back from understanding the truth?" The room fell silent, and for a moment, even the general seemed to fade out of focus. Jake felt the sphere of energy shift, and it was magnified by the uncertainty rippling around his audience. He could feel a crack forming in their armor of indifference. "No one likes feeling vulnerable, and that's okay. But I chose to be here today, to confront these ghosts," he went on, allowing emotion to seep into his voice, an act of calculated vulnerability. "So, are you willing to join me in a conversation? Or would you rather keep hiding behind jokes?" This direct armistice prompted a palpable tension in the air. The tall man hesitated, the playful dimples in his cheeks fading as the laughter fell dead. There could be acknowledgement, but was there room for growth? "Maybe we should listen," he finally muttered, his eyes avoiding Jake's. As anticipation filled the space, Jake could feel the edge of hope sharp against the pull of fear. The potential for authentic dialogue loomed, but he couldn't help but wonder if mere words would be enough. The danger of false triumph hung in the air. Would he actually succeed in changing hearts, or would this evolved confrontation only unveil deeper fissures? What was waiting on the other side of this moment that could either unify or rend apart their past? Whatever the outcome, Jake realized this was just the beginning. The path ahead was still uncertain, but he had stepped onto it, and that alone felt like victory. Little did he know, the greatest challenge was yet to emerge, and it would test everything he had dared to build. With breath held tight, he braced himself for what was to come. The stakes had heightened, and he knew true understanding lay tantalizingly close, but at what cost? Jake stood at the precipice of uncertainty, feeling the palpable tension thrum through the air. He had bared a piece of his soul, thrown his vulnerability into the arena for all to see, yet now he felt more exposed than ever. The tall man's reluctance to engage was unsettling, and Jake knew that silence could be heavier than mockery. As the minutes ticked by, each heartbeat drummed in Jake's ears, thrumming a rhythm of determination and dread. He scanned the faces before him, searching for signs of understanding or, at the very least, curiosity. The other members of the group shifted uncomfortably, their expressions betraying a cocktail of skepticism and intrigue. "Perhaps," Jake began cautiously, "you never imagined that the person standing before you now has survived through battles that most people can only read about. I carry those stories, and they're not just mine. They belong to every soldier who served alongside me." The tall man's crossed arms slowly unfolded, and for a fleeting moment, vulnerability flickered in his eyes. Jake could almost sense the inner conflict waging war within him, matching the tumult of Jake's own thoughts. The smile that had once belied superiority was now replaced by a thoughtful furrow of his brow. "Why now? Why here?" he finally asked, his voice softer, inquisitive. Jake seized the opportunity. "Because understanding is a bridge we have to build together. Stories can change lives, perspectives shift with each new narrative shared. If you're willing to listen, maybe you'll find a part of yourself in my journey." The atmosphere transformed. They were no longer just audience members disconnected from his struggle. With this act of courage, he felt the layers of their indifference start to peel away. Still, lingering doubts tugged at the corners of his mind. What if this moment was fleeting? What if he had merely exchanged one set of mockers for a more silently judgmental crowd? In the depths of his uncertainty, Jake suddenly envisioned the general standing strong beside him, a figure of unwavering resolve. It was an anchor that seemed to pull him back into the moment. Suddenly driven by purpose, he took a step closer, narrowing the distance both physically and psychologically. "Each of you stood here today to observe. But here's the truth, you're here because, despite your laughter, there's a longing for connection, a yearning for truth. I've seen the good, the horrific, the beautiful and the ugly in life and war. Today, I'm offering a glimpse into that, an invitation to know me and, perhaps, to know a part of yourselves." The 2 or 3 murmurs that rippled through the group indicated how deeply they were engaging with what he said. For the first time, Jake saw genuine interest replacing apathy. Their eyes locked onto his with a mix of caution and intrigue, a tangible energy that was almost electric ran between them. "Do you ever think about what stories we carry with us? Boys who become men, scars worn with pride. Tell me about your stories," he urged, a newfound confidence surging through him, weaving the thread of shared humanity. But as Jake navigated this fragile territory of vulnerability, his own past clawed at the edges of his mind. Distant memories of rejection and shame rose to the surface like ghosts, testifying to the pain buried deep within. Could he truly invite others to see him as he was while wrestling with the stigma of his past? A sudden voice broke through his internal struggle. It was the tall man again, and this time his tone was laced with sincerity. "It's easy to laugh, but it's harder to understand. What do we need to know?" With the question hanging heavily between them, Jake's heart raced. He was on the verge of stepping into deeper waters, navigating a conversation that could very well be a turning point not just for them, but for him as well. Could he finally disclose the roots of his pain and redemption, merging them into a narrative that might guide this group beyond mockery towards empathy? He opened his mouth, ready to share, yet at that intimate precipice, the stakes had never felt higher. The silence thrummed like a live wire, sparking anticipation. They were on the cusp of something profound, but would he be brave enough to dive in completely? And what depths would he need to plumb, both within himself and others, before he could emerge victorious? Jake inhaled sharply, steeling himself against the rising tide of anxiety. Every ounce of his being urged him to retreat, to hide behind the facade of stoic silence he had often worn. Yet, standing there on the verge of authenticity, he felt the weight of potential transformation pressing upon him. He realized this was more than mere storytelling, this was the forging of a new connection his life and experiences could ignite change. He took another step forward, gauging the eyes of the group, absorbing their mixed emotions. There was curiosity sprinkled with apprehension. Time felt elastic, stretching between him and the remarks poised to fly from his lips. The tall man's lingering gaze reminded him that, despite the laughter that had echoingly stung his pride, there was still room for understanding. "What you need to know," Jake began, letting the words tumble forth, "is that I didn't always carry these scars with grace." He gestured to the faint, winding lines on his arms, a testament to wounds once fresh, both physical and emotional. Each one speaks of survival against an ocean of doubt. I learned to stand tall in the unlikeliest of storms. As he spoke, he felt their attention sharpening, their indifference softening. He referenced a fateful day spent in the rugged mountains of Afghanistan, where a miscommunication nearly cost lives. That day, his instincts had kept his unit alive. I learned that trusting yourself in chaos is essential. You have to own not just your victories but your mistakes. Acceptance is the only path toward growth. His narrative unfolded like a tapestry, weaving threads of vulnerability and resilience. Jake shared tales of his struggles with reintegration into civilian life, his frustration at being labeled a hero one day and a freak the next. With every word, he peeled back the layers of his past, confronting the shame that had haunted him since his return, inviting the group to reflect upon their own grievances and fears. The tall man leaned in, eyes glimmering with newfound comprehension. You think it's easy for us to just make light of things? Look, we all carry stories. Sometimes we joke to mask our own pain. His confession mirrored what Jake had felt. The unspoken acknowledgement of shared burden kindled a flicker of unexpected solidarity. In the quiet moments that followed, Jake felt the invisible ties of human connection tightening. The room swelled with empathy as others began to share their own stories, laced with humor and hurt. They revealed personal trials, a mother's battle with addiction, a sibling's struggle with mental health, the cruel twist of fate that had uprooted their lives. Together, they began to forge an unrefined bond and acknowledgement that they were all wounded in some form. Yet just as camaraderie began to weave through the air, a familiar specter loomed in Jake's mind, the relentless specter of self-doubt that had kept him shackled for years. He reflected on the profound irony that lay in exposing their vulnerabilities. Each admission of pain opened up a new well of need. What if, in this vulnerable truth, the ties of judgment were merely replaced with new shackles of expectation? What if sharing his scars invited a darkness he thought he had escaped? Returning to the present, he took a deep breath, pushing the fear to the back of his mind. Sometimes the weight of just being human can feel unbearable, he said, resolute. But if we share our burdens, they become lighter. We can learn from each other, grow together. However, before he could elaborate, the large door at the back of the room swung open. A familiar figure stepped in, dressed in military garb. General Thompson, the man who had always inspired resilience in Jake. The sudden presence sent a ripple of tension through the group, contrasting the warmth they had just begun to forge. Jake's heart raced. Would the general support the strides he had begun to make, or would he reveal layers of Jake's life he wasn't ready to face? As all eyes turned to the general, Jake felt the weight of expectation shift yet again. Jake. The general called, his voice commanding attention. I think it's time we discuss not just the stories, but where they lead us. Suddenly, the air grew thick with anticipation as Jake prepared to confront not only the scrutiny of the general's insiders but perhaps the most important part of himself he hadn't yet unearthed. Would he step fully into this moment, or would fear once again strangle his voice? Jake's pulse quickened, and he felt the room's collective breath hold its weight in the atmosphere. General Thompson had a reputation for unwavering candor, and the glimmer of respect in his eyes sparked a mixture of fear and hope in Jake's mind. The general's words hung in the air, loaded with unspoken implications. Where do we go from here? The question felt like a dare, a challenge that Jake sensed extending beyond the physical space. He glanced around the room, noting the captivated faces, their anticipation palpable. Each individual, holding their own stories, seemed ready to unravel deeper truths. Every scar tells a tale, doesn't it? Thompson continued, looking directly at Jake. But tales don't end with mere survival. They can lead to empowerment if we learn to embrace them fully. Jake sensed a shift, a commitment to not just share pain but to find direction in it. Empowerment, the word resonated within him like a promise. Right, Jake replied, forcing confidence into his voice. But how do we transform those stories into something meaningful? I've spent so long afraid of my own history. He pressed his palms together, grounding himself. I fear that I'm just a cautionary tale. Cautionary tales can be powerful, the general replied, his tone transitioning to a softer cadence. But they're only powerful if they are harnessed. It's time to redefine your narrative, Jake. Revelation pierced through his anxiety like sunlight breaking through clouds. Perhaps this was a pivotal moment, his chance to not only tell his story but guide others in their own transformations. Let us not focus on just surviving, Jake said, his voice rising with newfound conviction. Let us find purpose in our stories. The heaviness of our burdens can become a foundation for something greater. An electric shift rippled through the crowd, and Jake felt himself stepping further into a leadership role. He was no longer just a man with scars, he was a vessel for change, prompting others to share, to grow. Let us break down our experiences, Jake proposed, looking around the semicircle at the individuals who sat before him. What if we take turns addressing how our past shapes our present? Acknowledge that we're not alone in our feelings. Each story could be a stepping stone. Murmurs of agreement rustled through the group. Inspiration hung like a thread, weaving tighter as stories unfolded. One by one, they began addressing the room, an exchange of courage that echoed Jake's earlier sentiments, each revelation fueled by the urgency of connection. Sometimes, a young woman with downcast eyes remarked, "I feel invisible because of my past. Like people see me through the lens of judgment, but I want to be seen for who I am today." Jake nodded, recalling his own struggles with being cast as a war hero, battling the reality of his vulnerabilities. "But what you're saying is vital," he interjected. "It's a reminder to us all. Those pasts don't define you. This moment, how you respond now. That's what's essential." General Thompson's gaze shifted from Jake to the others in the room, a silent acknowledgement of their shared growth unfolding. But even as Jake invited others to unearth their experiences, a thought shadowed him: was he truly ready to redefine his own narrative? The conversation deepened, becoming raw and poignant, but within Jake simmered a question. What did he want from this moment, from this clarity emerging out of shared vulnerability? "Jake," the general said, breaking through the cacophony of voices. "This is just the beginning. You have the power to unify this experience. So I ask you, how will you lead this discussion forward?" With each heartbeat, the clarity of his ambitions crystallized, yet Jake struggled to attach a name to it. This was more than mere storytelling, it was about purpose. It was about taking command of the desk he had once hidden beneath. But just as he felt the tide of resolve swell within him, doubt clung stubbornly at the edges. What if leadership meant he would have to continue confronting the shadows of his past? Jake took a deep breath. Poised to answer, resilience glinting within him but uncertainty nagging at the back of his mind. "Let us find that purpose together," he finally said. "But first, I need to face something within myself." And as he prepared to unearth that hidden truth, he realized that the next step demanded even greater bravery, drawing him closer to the core of his journey, the question of whether he could accept this pivotal role without becoming swallowed by fear. Jake's heartbeat drummed in his ears, each pulse resonating with the weight of his own expectations. He felt the gaze of everyone in the room weighing upon him now, as if he were peering into a mirror fracturing under pressure. The challenge posed by General Thompson hung heavy in the air. How would he steer this sea of vulnerability and shared histories? His mind raced. How could he summon the courage to lead this group away from the echoing pain of their pasts toward an empowered future? As he fumbled with his words, a sense of urgency washed over him, an urge to wield their collective experiences like a weapon against their insecurities. "What I want to confront," Jake began, his voice stronger than he anticipated, "is the lingering shame I've carried with me. The war left scars not only on my body but also on my mind. I've hidden behind a facade of strength for too long, but beneath that facade is a man who has been profoundly afraid of failing again." His admission created waves of silence. All eyes were on him, but he saw flickers of understanding reflected in their expressions. He wasn't just unearthing his story, he was inviting them to do the same, establishing a space that demanded authenticity. "I want us to build a sanctuary of honesty here," Jake proposed, a plan forming as he spoke. "Let us tackle our fears head-on. Let us confront what we've avoided. If we can do that together, maybe we can turn those tales of survival into stories of triumph. From somewhere in the depths of the room, a hesitant voice emerged. What if I can't face it? A middle-aged man queried, his hands trembling. What if those memories consume me? Jake locked eyes with him, recognizing the profound vulnerability layered in that question. What if, he countered, pacing slightly, we allow ourselves to believe that those memories can empower rather than consume? What if we rewrite the ending of our stories? As the man nodded slowly, uncertainty still etched in his brow, Jake felt a spark of transformative energy coursing through the group. They were entering uncharted territory together, potentially nurtured by a collective resilience. Let us share what we've hidden, Jake continued, a sense of determination unwavering. I'll go first. I let the medals I earned become a source of mockery in my mind. Instead of celebrating them as symbols of bravery, I saw them as reminders of the man I could not save, the nightmares I still revisit. The tension shifted visibly as he laid bare a fragment of his soul. He reminded himself that emotion could be harmonious, that vulnerability was an invitation rather than a risk. He stepped firmly into leadership, fully aware that the shadows of his past were now informing a new path forged under the weight of authenticity. One by one, others began to share. The young woman spoke again, her voice now stronger. I thought my past was a barrier, but maybe it can be a bridge. Jake watched as her revelation ignited a willingness to confront. Moments fused together, stronger than the initial anxiety that had gripped them. It was transformative, a mosaic of stories that began to interlace, forming a fabric deeply intertwined with healing. As Jake moved around the circle, drawing forth stories of hardship, he felt the fire of purpose building within him. Yet, with every truth spoken, a question surged forward: was he truly prepared to face moments beyond this one? Each revelation brought with it the challenge of sustaining such authentic engagement, especially when shadows threatened to rise again. Just as the atmosphere began to feel charged with renewed hope, a sly voice emerged at the back of the room. But what if this is just a temporary high? What happens when the reality sets back in? Jake froze, grappling with the cynical undertone that threatened to sabotage the momentum they had built. The voice cut deep, reminder that this journey of vulnerability was fraught with swirling doubts. With a steadying breath, Jake turned to face the shadow that loomed larger now. Maybe we can't prevent moments of doubt, but we can equip ourselves with the tools to navigate through them instead of succumbing. And that's why we're here to do this together. But as he spoke, a lingering frustration simmered within him. Despite his resolute stance, he couldn't shake off the gnawing idea that the real battle was yet to come. It was a question of endurance in facing his own buried demons. Could souls as fragmented as theirs build genuine connections amidst the chaos brewing under the surface? With his heart pounding fiercely, Jake prepared himself for the upcoming confrontation, both internal and external. The moment had arrived to grapple not just with the stories they had shared, but with the discomfort waiting just outside the door of their transformed lives. What truth would emerge from facing those shadows? Jake took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts as he faced the chorus of doubts swirling around him. This was no longer just about confronting the mocking laughter of outsiders, it was about facing the subtle derision lodged deep within his own mind, the echoes of self-doubt that had long kept him shackled. As he stood before the group, he understood now that they were in this together, not in their individual struggles but in unearthing the core of their truths. Maybe the voices of doubt don't entirely vanish, he began, his voice carrying a newfound gravity. But we can learn not to let them define us. Sharing our stories connects us. It bridges our pain with hope, and hope with growth. The room fell quiet as his words reverberated, creating a space where vulnerability transformed into strength. The tall man, the one who had earlier scoffed, leaned forward, eyes narrowed with newfound curiosity. What if we fail, though? What if we just end up back where we started? Then we'll be that much closer to understanding, Jake replied sharply but sincerely, locking eyes with him. Failure isn't an endpoint, it's part of the journey. The true failure lies in the refusal to confront our stories. Jake could see in their expressions that he was beginning to weave a connection, a shared understanding that their scars carried harbored lessons, ones that could guide them forward rather than trap them in fear. The room had shifted, and with it, Jake felt a wave of courage wash over him. He was no longer just a veteran fighting to reclaim his identity, he was becoming a catalyst for change. Sharing is where healing begins, he continued, his timbre steady. When we break the silence around our pain, we draw forth our truths, transforming them into lessons that can uplift us and those around us. Let us use this moment as a springboard for dialogue rather than a destination. A murmur of agreement buzzed through the room, and Jake felt the energy swell, buoyed by the collective acknowledgement that they were all in some state of transformation. With each story that unfolded, from the young woman's revelation of familial struggles to the tall man's admission of feeling lost in the cacophony of expectations, Jake could feel the group coming alive with a shared purpose. They were not simply recounting tales, they were actively reshaping their identities. Yet amidst the blossoming understanding, Jake's thoughts circled back to his own lingering fears. Would he be able to maintain this newfound leadership? To foster a space where these conversations could flourish? He felt the weight of their expectations heavily upon him, but in that weight, he recognized his own strength. The past had left scars, but it had also gifted him with resilience and insight. I want to invite each of you to think about your stories in a different light, Jake continued, his gaze sweeping over the attentive crowd. What if instead of retreating into bitterness or fear, we reframe these experiences as opportunities for growth? Each moment we face can teach us something about ourselves, about resilience, about connection. The response was palpable, and Jake seized the momentum. What if we establish a monthly gathering? One where we can come back together to share, to listen, to support? We could create a way to hold each other accountable, not just for our struggles but for our triumphs as well. Yes, the general interjected, a forum for empowerment, a space that transforms vulnerability into collective resilience. This can be historical, he added, his voice imbued with conviction. Jake's spirit soared. They were on the brink of something essential, just a leap away from redefining their identities not only as individuals but as a community. A space where laughter could be replaced with understanding, and skepticism with a camaraderie steeped in authenticity. One by one, hands elevated in the room, signaling eagerness to join in this newfound commitment. He could feel the air shift, charged with possibility, the previous doubts and mockeries dissipated, smothered by a unified sense of purpose. In that enlightening moment, Jake understood he had transformed from a shadow lurking in his own doubts to a beacon of hope for others seeking connection. He had achieved the courage to confront not only those who scoffed at his metals but, ultimately, the irony of his own belief that had long held him back. As the evening drew to a close, Jake found himself standing in front of the crowd, heart racing but grounded in newfound confidence. With their commitment to ongoing dialogue and shared healing solidified, Jake felt a sense of profound personal achievement. He would no longer be defined by laughter or judgment, he was a warrior of a different sort now, a warrior of stories woven from loss and triumph, resolutely stepping into the future he had begun to forge. Satisfaction enveloped him as his journey transformed from one of isolation to one bursting with potential to cultivate an environment where vulnerability could flourish unashamed. Let us keep this going, he emphasized, the words rolling out with clarity. This is just the beginning. Together, we can conquer not just our pasts but embrace a future of empowerment, of connection. Thank you all for being part of this. The room erupted in applause, not for the medals or accolades but for the courage to be human together. This was his moment to open a door leading toward growth and to reclaim his identity on his own terms. Jake's heart brimmed with hope, and at that instant, he finally felt seen. You need to subscribe now to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to share. Your support matters in illuminating these transformative narratives.